Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and happy Sabbath. Uh, thank you, everyone, for joining. The presentation that I will be going over this morning is it's from Vespers, Elder Tess Lambert, and it's called The Far Right Trinity, um, on January 4th, 2022. So that's the reference of this study. Now, the reason I chose this study is because I find it to be particularly relevant to the time that we're living in, specifically the election time period that has just passed. And in this study, she will be referencing the election and also voting and so forth. Now, the title of this presentation, what I named it, the original name is The Far Right Trinity, but this presentation is 1 hour and a half long, but I want to be focusing on the last half hour, and mainly because she um basically comprises everything. Like, she speaks freely and just gives like a punchline at the end, and just explains everything very thoroughly. So we're going to listen to the video, and I will be stopping off and on to discuss some lines and some points that we can go over together. Okay. In this study, she will be going over the ethos of the left and the right, which we know as freedom versus equality. She repeats the phrase Sunday law over a dozen times in the last portion of this study. And we know that it is referring to more specifically, or more perfectly, in the time period that we're living in. Okay. And this study will also complement Elisa's study that she just did, which talks about the mindset of God and the mindset of Satan. And basically, she talks about how there's two political systems, and she traces it all the way back to heaven. Okay. So as we listen, we want to pick up on certain keywords such as the Sunday law, election campaign, political party, freedom versus equality, ethos, and government. So I named this study The Sunday Law is All About an Election Campaign. That's the study name, and I'm going to press play. Let me know if the video can be seen or not. Let's see.
I can see it, but the volume's really low.
Okay, let me turn.
I believe in. I am not going to try and go into a
Is that better?
that is against.
Or is that still low?
It's a little low, but it's better.
Okay, let me turn it up a little bit.
I don't find fun.
Just
So
to
I
double
have
check, did you click the extra box to enhance the sound
groups of people that I can be comfortable
when you go to
around
share
with.
screen?
What Reddit has been a platform for,
What you could
especially
do is unshare it and then reshare it and make sure you
men's
check
rights
boxes.
forums.
There's like
So
two little radio boxes you have to
these
click.
days,
Share
where men
audio.
get together on forums to support and promote men's rights, obviously with the idea that men's rights or men's freedoms are under threat.
Oh, share sound.
by the
Okay.
left. They particularly had to Reddit to form those men's rights communities. When we spoke about
Did
the
it
Vox
work?
article, and we shared that article and you read it. Has anyone
It sounds good to me. Let's see.
explaining Reddit in the context of that article?
Oh, someone's requesting to start it from the beginning since we have this issue.
To zoom in. Greg.
In the article, it was explaining about how they were going to forums such as Reddit, and they were speaking with people who were like-minded. And obviously in the article, it also showed that there were a few women who tried to put their opinions in, but I'm assuming now, seeing those stats, because it's 63% male and young males probably, that the women were made to feel really bad or kicked out of the forum or, yeah.
Yes. The context of this article is particularly one man.
Max. And what is Max? You get to the point
Max
in
is
that
a
article.
libertarian.
He's a libertarian, but he's more than a libertarian. There's a few things that Max
Okay, did it
is.
work? Is that better?
It's called
Is it
the
MRA?
Trinity.
It sounds
Yeah,
better
it's
to me.
much better. Yeah, it's
Okay.
MRA or men's. I can't remember the R and the A.
Men's rights.
Authority. Yeah.
1, 2, 3. What is the famous Trinity? Men's rights activist. In other words, men's rights are under threat from women and the left. But what's 2 and 3 in this all too common Trinity? Brendan.
Libertarian and atheist.
Libertarian and atheist. When we talk about the far right today in the context of gender, but really in the context of anything, when we talk about the far right, this is the most dangerous trinity that they see in action. There are some things Max is proud to be. He is an outspoken atheist and an active libertarian. The contours are the same, a proactive anti-clericalism and a distaste for regulatory apparatus, couched in a vague sense that this distaste constitutes a moral stance. So he will see feminism with that kind of government-enforced morality, very similar to how he will see religion. There is this government, God. It's all a bit of a con. It takes away from people's freedom. It's all the regulatory apparatus, and it's all a type of conspiracy theory, because he will see religion, Christianity, as a conspiracy theory. He's atheist. He also sees discrimination against women as a type of conspiracy theory. A wage gap, what wage gap? Discrimination, what discrimination? Women have power. Women are caregivers. Being a caregiver carries with it a type of power. And what they're seeing is that this trinity of atheism with libertarianism, with this belief that men's rights are under threat and opposition to feminism is a very common trinity. And to prove that, they go to Reddit. A survey taken last year of the men's rights subreddit found that 94% of the men on these subreddits identify as atheist or religiously different. That's why I wanted you to see Reddit is not a small community to survey. So if you go to Reddit, where you would find about 1 in 3 men in the United States are active on, and you go to men's rights subreddits, you're going to find that can't draw their logo like Rachel Keb. I loved their logo. 94% are not Christian, are not anything. They're atheist. 84% are strongly conservative. But when they're strongly conservative, they do not lean Republican because they're atheist. They're not looking for church and state. They're leaning libertarian, with a leaning towards libertarianism. 94% of their membership identify as atheist or religiously indifferent. 84% identify as strongly conservative with particular policy preferences along a libertarian, not a traditional bent. So they're not after traditional values in the religious kind of sense. For those of us hailing from the nominal left, these associations have at times felt unnatural, right-wingers using the rhetoric of social justice to argue for the traditional status of men, all the while eschewing, in a way more typical of the left, the patriarchal religious institutions that have classically underpinned these values. When Max speaks about one ideology, men's rights, he can hardly help bringing in the others, libertarianism and atheism. For him, they are all related, distinct expressions of the same worldview. And then it goes into his concept of religion. He calls religion one of the biggest threats to society. He says that feminism, statism, all of that, while not being explicitly about God, is the same kind of religious impulse. He calls it all, feminism, like religion, a type of big lie, a type of indoctrination that we receive through life. So that's why we wanted to understand Reddit. We have to see the significance of these online forums, that this is not a small, obscure part of the internet. This is a fair reflection of the right wing in the United States when you go onto these subreddit forums. So sure, that traditional values, conservative with a traditional bent, evangelical church-state union portion of the right wing supported Donald Trump, continues to, is a threat today. That's kind of an older generation. And what we're seeing is the younger generation. Because when you go into this kind of portion of the far right, you're also dealing with a younger audience. So I want to give a little bit more background into the far right, both leaders and also the groups they're part of or the groups they lead. We might have to finish that next week, but I want us to discuss the Oath Keepers, of course, the Proud Boys. We've already started discussing the Proud Boys. I'll use their logo, the 3%ers. And I have to make sure I spell that right. It's less of a really well-formed group than the above three, but there is the Boogaloo movement. Particularly the first three are properly organized far-right militia groups in the United States today, and they haven't been around forever. They particularly, most of them, you can tie their roots back to pretty much 2009, the election of Barack Obama, but also the wider context of that history. Do we have any thoughts or questions on that second article that we went to? Because that was the main point of that article. I wanted us to see, like you said, Mrs. Bennett, just how common that thinking was. Rachel, you carried us through the history of 2014 Gamergate. We see these leaders, those who are most outspoken in 2014, but they have a degree of voice and power because the millions underneath them who, perhaps not with outspoken violent fervor or perhaps not 100% supporting everything that they say, but supporting of the ideology that those men were espousing in 2014. Marie.
One thing that stood out to me, the phrase, they've lost their place, made me realise conservative Adventism, when they're talking about headship and the males, I've often heard them say how they've lost their place, and it's, it's all because of women, taking on different roles. So I thought that was interesting, where that's actually coming from and the connection there.
Yes, they have that feeling of being threatened, but it's not coming from a religious position or a religious perspective. They're atheist and they still strongly feel this group threat.
And I think it's interesting that the Adventists are connecting with them in that way. It's sort of like bridging that connection there.
Yes.
So it seems to me.
Yes. It's all connected to the same idea. We're discussing the right wing, which stands for freedom. And when we drew that out, we saw that evangelicals today and the Republican Party, they stand for freedom over equality, but not in its most pure sense. We're going into its most pure sense, which is why, if this is freedom over equality, and this is equality over freedom, the more that you espouse freedom over equality, the further on the right political spectrum you're going to get, aren't you? The more pure your belief in absolute freedom is going to become. And the more pure you believe in freedom, the more you are going to oppose any attempts to promote social equality.
The more you're going to see
promotions of equality as a threat to you. That's why you're going to find someone like Enrique Tarrio, who's not white, opposing Black Lives Matter while saying he is not racist. Why? What then is threatening him? What is making him so angry and so upset that he's burning flags, attacking historical churches, and being found before January 6th in the Capitol with a weapon stash? What makes someone do that except the feeling of being extremely threatened, your rights and liberties being threatened? You might think that as you get further and further into the right wing here, you're going to get further into religious fundamentalism. 2022, that's not really the case. So we went to Reddit to see that. I'm going to quote, and I won't give the whole article because I actually don't agree with a lot of the things he says, but I'm going to quote a male atheist. He says, quoting a male atheist here, by neglecting to address its darker currents, online atheism has perhaps unknowingly planted the seeds for the alt-right's harvest. 3 years ago, Reddit's atheism subforum, perhaps the largest community of atheists on the internet, was found to be the website's third most bigoted, meaning not just tolerant of overt displays of bigotry, but actively supportive of them. Last year, the Daily Beast revealed that the study's most bigoted Reddit subforum, called the Red Pill, was founded by Robert Fisher, a Republican state lawmaker who is also an atheist. So we need to see, when we look at the news and we see the far right, when we see the Proud Boys, when we see the Oath Keepers, when we see the 3%ers, when we see the Boogaloo movement and we look at January 6th, a lot of this is new. There's always been that kind of stream in society, but the activation of that stream, how mainstream it has become, how violent and visible and political it has become, is really only since about 2009 to today. I think at least the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers trace their beginning to 2009. But the entire kind of militia movement in the United States would tie it back to about that time period. Josephine.
Yeah, I've thought about the equality and the freedom when they conflict. I might be taking us a little bit back to your the camp meeting we just had, to one of, is that all right, or should I just leave it?
No, by all means.
I first read the Adventist quote you had there, I think it's back in 1986, and I raised it in an Adventist church, and I was quite surprised that that was a really big deal, that Christ died not because of the wounds or the treatment he did, what broke his heart. That's what I mean. Not because of that, but because of the sin. Now, I had wondered then as to what exactly the sin was, but I never got the idea. But as I went through it with you in your lecture, it and the way you present it, how it broke Christ's heart, it was so, like, it's embedded in my mind how bad that how familiarity with sin and how hard to eradicate that sin from the lives of humanity, that it's taken a whole Eden to do that, and it really made an impact on my mind, and the conflict between freedom and equality, and how you mentioned about force. The big government has to apply force sometimes, and maybe pressure, like strong pressure, extreme pressure, in order to have equality. And I don't know, it just had an impact it's never had on me before. Just realizing what you just mentioned.
Were you done?
Yes, thank you.
What we've seen.
Okay, so the last 10 minutes of this presentation, I actually wrote it out. So I want us to read it together and go through some of these highlights, some of these points that are relevant today. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation now, and there's 3 paragraphs that we're going to read together. Let me see if I can share this different screen now. Okay. Can everyone see it?
Yes, got it.
Okay. So this is the conclusion of our small study this morning, and I highlighted some key terms here in particular. So as you can see at the top, the Sunday law is all about an election campaign. And as we read through these paragraphs, this statement will become will be easier to see and more relevant, more easy to see for today. Okay, so I will read, and you can stop me at any time with comments, and so we can discuss these points together. Okay, what we've seen, so this is Elder Tess, closing off her study, but I wanted to read it so we can have a more in tune understanding of it, or a more thorough. Okay, what we've seen for 6,000 years is nothing more than a political election going right back to heaven. Okay, so here, notice how she's saying for 6,000 years, this is nothing more than a political election going all the way back to heaven. So the whole great controversy is a political election. Okay, God has a political party, and Satan says, I'm going to start my own political party. You have a political party, I'm going to have a political party. And now let's get all the angels to vote. 2/3 of the angels vote one way, and 1/3 of the angels vote another way. God says, okay, Adam and Eve, it's your turn to vote now. I'm going to set up a very simple voting, and you can decide what government you want, what political party you want to support. They voted on behalf of this earth to support Lucifer's political party. And ever since then, all throughout the history from Eden to the cross, it's just been a fight. It's been one election campaign after another, like one following another. Generation after generation of God just asking people to vote. Decide which government you want. Okay, so notice the context that she's creating here. The great controversy all the way from Eden to the cross, she's putting it in the format of a political campaign that revolves around voting. Okay, people only, okay, that has been the story from Eden to the cross. It's the story of the cross. Christ is on the cross. He's in enemy, first his heart breaks there. He can see what happens when people choose Satan's political side. People only choose Satan's side because he makes it look so beautiful. He makes it look fair, logical, reasonable, beautiful. It's the reasonable right, isn't it? It's the red pill. It's the side that hasn't bought into the con, that is Christianity, the con that is feminism, the side that's thinking for themselves. Okay, so notice here how she's once again putting this context in the framework of two political systems, two sides, and there reaches a point in time where there's an election. Like at the cross, there was an election, right? They raised their hand and voted either for Christ or for Satan, right? And that is going to be repeated here at the end. But this next paragraph, as we read it, notice how this key term or keyword Sunday law. Notice how it's brought up over and over again, I think over a dozen times. And so she's going to bring this election campaign framework into the Sunday law time period, which we know we're living through and have experienced the election cycle here not too long ago. So notice, Christ sees that and it breaks his heart. But ever since then, today, and especially at the Sunday law, all it is, the entire great controversy is an election campaign. Satan is selling his political platform, and Christ is selling his political platform. And that's the significance of 2018. Okay, so she's taking that and applying it in 2018, but we know that has a more direct fulfillment in our time period because we're living through this Sunday law time period. So we can take these words and, of course, apply them here in our time period. Okay, that's what we're calling out two streams of information to be. You can see it externally. We go to 2016. Okay, so she's taking it back to 2016 in that election cycle where people voted in that time period. Okay. It's not a perfect parable, but you have two streams, two political systems, and you know that you have to be able to see the great controversy in 2016 because 2016 is going to lead you to the Sunday law. The Sunday law, you see the great, no, at the Sunday law, you see the great controversy at the Sunday law, and you know that the Sunday law is about politics. So you have to be able to see the great controversy in politics in the United States. So here you see the great controversy in the same context or even the same framework of the Sunday law. And so she ties all of these things together in the same thread. Sunday law, great controversy, election cycle, election campaign, and voting. So all of these things she's repeating in the same structure. Okay. The Sunday law has always been a political issue. Whether it was slavery or whether that was about the enforcement of Sunday, it's always a political issue. It's always got two sides fighting or against it in Congress. Wait, it's always a political issue. It's always two sides fighting for or against it in Congress. Okay, so she's talking here about the time period of the Sunday Law in 1888, where they were fighting in Congress. But of course, we can apply that in our time period as well. So if there is going to be a side for and against the Sunday Law at the Sunday Law, then you're going to have two sides, one against the Sunday Law, who must represent in whatever poor fashion they do God's political party. And if you're going to have another side fight for the Sunday Law, then in whatever poor fashion they do, they're fighting for Satan's political party. It's all about politics. Okay, so here in this past sentence, what she's saying is that both sides of the spectrum, right, the left and the right, one side is fighting for and the other side is fighting against. And she's saying, in whatever poor fashion they do, hold on. One side against the Sunday Law, who must represent in whatever poor fashion they do God's political party, and if they, so in whatever poor fashion they do it, they're doing it nevertheless. Like they're fighting either for or against. Okay, so that's representing the test, the political party and the voting. It's all about politics. I don't know why people or Adventists think they can understand the great controversy. They can understand the Sunday Law, and somehow they can do all of that without understanding or taking any external position in politics today. So in other words, she's saying Adventists think they understand the Sunday Law, but they don't want to have any knowledge of politics. You know, sometimes they fear politics, or they say politics is not for us, or politics has nothing to do with it. But we know that politics is directly connected to the Sunday Law time period and the Sunday Law test, because that's when they have to make a decision about what political party they want. But they're choosing between two different ethos. They're choosing between left-wing ethos or right-wing ethos. So here she's bringing the ethos into the narrative. Okay, we know that earlier she had a line on the board where it showed equality and freedom. Is there any comments or any input that anyone wants to address at this time about what we just read?
Susan says their choice, irregardless of whether they participate in an actual ballot vote. Now, I just wanted to say thanks for taking the time to slow down and listen to all our words, because you make a good point there about it being the election. With her words, that's pretty good. Thank you.
Yes, I think that this presentation really brings those points out. Like when I heard it this past couple of weeks, I was trying to figure out what presentation stood out for me. And this one in particular, the last 30 minutes Well, the whole thing, she puts it into context, but the last 30 minutes really brings out this these issues that we've been grappling with these last couple of weeks. And so she puts it in these sentences very nicely for us to understand how the Sunday law is tied in with a political party and the whole, in fact, notice how here at the beginning she says the whole 6,000 years is nothing more than a political election. Okay. And she's even taken it all the way back to heaven. And we know that in a previous presentation where um, she actually puts it how Satan was the first conservative, right? He is the one that when the new information came out that Christ is the eternal, Son of God, and they were confronted with that new information, they had to make a decision, right? And then the enemy at that time said, no, let's conserve the old information. And some of them still wanted to retain that old information, which they thought that Christ was, just an ordinary angel. But when God came and said, no, he is eternal, they were confronted with this new information. And so they had to make a decision. They had to vote. And that was the first conservative illustration of whether you're going to move on to the next new information or you're going to retain or try to be stuck in the old information, right? The old understanding. So in any case, you can see the same illustration all the way back in heaven, and so she brings it very nicely here to the Sunday law time period.
Can I say something too?
Yes, please.
She's also making the point that it's two political parties to decide between. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's two political parties.
Yeah.
There's always two sides, and
I
and
was
this,
just thinking,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead, please.
Victor, I was just
No,
thinking
no,
about
no.
that a little because like what would be the analog to the electoral college vote, or not even the electoral college, sorry, the RNC vote. That would just be like a certain delegate of Satan's followers that would be voting for Satan, and that's not how the election in heaven operated. It was the whole of heaven that voted, so to speak.
Between two parties, right?
Right, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. The term body politic came to my mind, and I was like, what does that mean? What is the body politic? And when I looked it up, it really means all the voters of a specific country. And since America is the prophetic narrative, right, where the Sunday law takes place, it makes sense that it would culminate with the whole body politic making their choice. And as you were going over this, Victor, I was just like, wow, it seems so simple now when we are reviewing it, but it had so many moving parts to it. You know what I mean? So much information initially back when Elder Tess gave this presentation that it was like really difficult, at least for me. But hindsight always clears it all up. But I was also thinking when you brought out that Adventists want to avoid politics, I found it interesting that the very first job I had, that was the two topics we were not allowed to discuss with clients was religion or politics, because those are the two topics that cause you'll make people uncomfortable.
That's
And
right.
right? And whether they vote or not, so say Adventists think they are being pristine to their religion by not voting, they're still making up their mindset. And so they are still making their choice for either Satan's ideology or God's, right?
Yes, exactly.
To not vote,
May I add?
Please.
to not vote as an Adventist, to not vote because you want to stay out of politics, then you're not participating to fight against, I mean, to fight for human rights or to fight against. And by default, don't you wind up within the camp of those that will not protect human rights? Because you should have stood up and fought for human rights.
That's right.
So there was I think Troy in the comments made or had a question of whether the worldwide Sunday law was going to be an election as well. And I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I actually don't think it will be. Because if we go back to Daniel 11:40, 41, and 42, where there's the progression of the king of the north overtaking the south, the glorious land, and then the world. I don't think that the world is going to be given an option. I think it's going to be just a continual trampling of more and more taking away human rights. I think the vote took place in 2024, the year of the elections. The majority of the world's voting countries had their chance, and now just a progressive build on that choice that was made.
May I add to what Alyssa just stated? If you're through, Alyssa, I don't know if you're through.
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. I think it was yesterday, and I rarely look at X anymore, just occasionally, right? And the first video that was there by a liberal was an Irish woman from Ireland, and she was stating that everyone's welcome to come to Ireland. She named all the different types of people that are welcome in her beloved Ireland, right? I guess it's the northern part she lived in. But she said the only people who are not welcome here are MAGA. You are not welcome here. And she went on to elaborate about that. But I was thinking on the lines of that Alyssa is going. I was thinking it won't necessarily now be an election per se, but it's still the choice because people are having to make up their mind. Even if your country is taken over and conquered, you still have the choice, right, to decide for your own conscience what's right. So I think it'll be on a conscience level more than an actual ballot level like we experienced here. If that
Yes.
goes along with what Alyssa was, that's what I think you were saying, Alyssa.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, thank you all. My thoughts were really about not necessarily like into the American election, but I know sometimes even the UN sometimes have some sort of voting, so I was thinking along that line. I wonder if it's gonna be some sort of voting, but I agree with with everybody's opinions. Thanks.
So another thing to add, Victor, touching on the people that Elder Tess had pointed out were like the Proud Boys, those types of groups.
Yes.
There's an article, I think it was in Spectrum magazine. There was an Adventist publication that I read an article earlier in the year. It was on the people who voted for Trump. And one person that was interviewed talked about how Trump won over the more of the young voting population in particular when he went on Joe Rogan. And while I know Elder Tess didn't touch on Joe Rogan, I think he kind of fits in with the type of people, the type of individual demographic that she was kind of highlighting. Like, these are the libertarian groups. I think Joe Rogan fits into that pretty well. And it was really interesting, like just the fact that there was a group of Adventists that supported Trump because he went on Joe Rogan's podcast, because a lot of Adventists are supportive of that type of mentality. It was really interesting. That's all.
Yes, that's a good point, and that point that you just referenced actually leads into this next paragraph, which is basically the snare, if you would, that many are caught up in, which is, well, if the Christian right is Christian, then that must be the safer option or the safer place because at least they're Christian and they call that, they're vocal about it. And so notice here in this next paragraph what she says about that point. Is there any other comments that anyone has, or can we move forward? Okay. So notice here, when we talk about the right wing historically, we've always gone here and seen evangelicals, seen church and state, because we go back to the Reformation and we go and we see the fault and failings of Calvin and John Knox, how they supported church and state, how that moved to the United States through the first and second great awakenings. Then we see that traced through history, but when we get to now, and it's a post-Christian world, we end up in a dangerous position. So notice here she says a dangerous position because what a lot of people do is they trace the line from the Reformation all the way down to this Christian time period. And so they think that it's the safer option, but that's the dangerous position. Notice here she says, if we keep thinking that it's Republican Christians who are the clearest representative of it, sounds harsh, but it's not. Now I'll put this in parentheses, but notice what she says next. Well, let me go back. It says here, who are the clearest representatives of it, of Lucifer's political party. They're not the clearest representatives because it's in a post-Christian world. So we need to understand the right wing as it exists over here. Okay. So that's something that, and another thing I would add is that for Adventists is that what I like to go back to is the quote from Inspiration, where she says that, I'm sorry, that after 1842, the Protestant churches were left in perfect darkness, and that fall is not complete till the Sunday Law. So that is a good quote for Adventists who think that, well, the Christian right is the safer option, but Inspiration says that they're in perfect darkness and they're in a fallen state since they rejected the first angel's message. Since 1842, all the way to the Sunday Law, the Christian right is in perfect darkness. So that is not the safer option. Does that make sense? I like using that quote also to plug into this argument here.
One thing to add to that,
Yes.
the safer option triggers my thinking into a peace and safety message.
Okay.
That's the thing to avoid, right? That's I can't remember the full statement, but there's so much danger in a peace and safety message. And that's what people were going towards, was the safety of the Republican, the conservative message.
Yes, exactly. And so, okay, so we need to understand the post-Christian world as it exists today. So we can't take the Christian world from the time of the Reformation and plug it in today and say, well, that's the thread. We can't do that. It's a post-Christian world, okay? So where you might have Mitt Romney and get a Ted Cruz, and you'll get everything on this political spectrum that will say, however nicely they'll say it, freedom has to trump equality or we'll lose both. We care about equality, but if we don't prioritize freedom, then the country will cease to be a republic and everything will die. But I want us to move beyond that kind of right-wing rhetoric that gets mocked when you go online and you see videos of Republican senators, asking Mark Zuckerberg, so you like Twitter? My grandkids are on Twitter, and it all gets mocked. These older generation Republicans, heavily a Christian kind of leaning, they're not America's future. America's future is a post-Christian, and that's where that is the right wing. That's where we see rising up today. That's what we've seen rising up since 2009. It's not a growing evangelical power base in the United States that is propelling us towards the Sunday Law. It's not. What's propelling us towards the Sunday Law is what particularly started around 2009, a more activist and militant right wing, and this is heavily millennials, which is somewhere in their 20s to about 40s. Heavily millennials end up with that younger base, very concerned about their rights of men in the face of feminism and LGBTQ rights, libertarian and atheistic. So those are she is describing the new form or the new phase of Christianity or Christian right as it exists today, and not those old, old school Christian kind of leaning. So here she says, I will close, but there's a couple of questions. I will close if you could mind holding them. Okay. Let's see here.
Victor,
Yes.
that brings to mind, I had read a book called Against Heresies by Irenaeus, and he was one of
Okay.
the founding fathers of the Christian movement. I think it was he wrote it in, I think, 150 AD. And the understanding was when the Christians were sent to the Colosseums to be eaten by lions and all that, they considered Christians, they accused Christians of being atheists. So I found that where you're talking about the libertarians and the atheists, which would be that new political maybe mindset or political whatever that is, whatever you want to label that. That's interesting because in the first century, when the Christians were being killed in the Colosseums, they were the mindset of all the people were that these Christians were atheists.
Oh, I understand.
Hey, Victor,
Yes.
it seems to me when I think back on the Vespers that Elder Tess did about that time, the culmination of the thought that I had was that although previously a lot of focus was spent on looking at about the so-called Christian elements in this country and pushing for church state and everything up to a point, and looking at Goldstein's article, but when it came right down to it, she was trying to say that, but as you're pointing out, that the far greater threat is not from the Christian element, which she saw as a small sliver on the right side. She saw that the extreme right, which is almost identical to the extreme left, make up the larger segment of people. And when you brought out that she's talking about Reddit and saying how many people on Reddit and who are of a different demographic and how much they support that are atheists and men's rights activists and libertarians, it's almost, to me, if I could use this analogy, if there's somebody who's going to be surfing and they're on a surfboard, it seems like the giant wave is actually the atheists and the the men's rights activists and the libertarians, and you've got this small sliver of Protestantism mixing with the government that's actually riding the wave, but they're not the ones creating the wave, if I could say it that way.
Yes, that makes sense. That's a good comment. Yeah, I understand. Thank you for that. So basically, in closing, she says here that when there are basically three things: libertarians plus guns plus conspiracy theories. It's not republicanism, it's not Christianity. You arm libertarians and then you give them conspiracy theories, and that's where you get the far right today. That's where you get them to unite in the right rallies.
Could you repeat that again?
So it says here, it's not Christian. Okay.
Maybe throw it back on the screen again.
let me do that. Okay. So here at the very bottom, I will notice the last few sentences. It says here, I will close if you could mind holding them. Okay, so until next week, but there are just a couple of experts on militias at the Anti-Defamation League. And he said, when you look at these militias, they are basically three things: libertarians plus guns plus conspiracy theories. It's not republicanism, it's not Christianity. You arm libertarians and then you give them conspiracy theories. And that's where you get the far right of today. That's where you get them to unite in the right rallies, or the rallies of the right. So we'll come back to that and break it down next week, if you'll kneel with me. That's her. That's Elder Tess. Okay.
Victor?
Yes.
So it's interesting that those three things are combined. So the article that I was talking about earlier about the Adventists who decided to vote for Trump because he went on Joe Rogan. His first statement was that he was in support of the Second Amendment, well, the Constitution, then the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, because that's what held the right for all the other constitutional amendments that would support, I guess, the rights of humans in America. And I just thought that was really interesting, how she combined all of those groups, because that's what happened. All of the different libertarians that supported the guns, that also the conspiracy theories, because all of what Trump was about was helping people to distrust the media and support guns, and it's just really interesting.
That's right. Yes, thank you for that. So, in closing, the title that I chose for this study was "The Sunday Law is All About an Election Campaign." And so that particularly stood out for me, because of the time period that we're living in. So I chose this presentation specifically, the last 30 minutes, which she emphasizes and brings out these particular points. And what really stood out for me is that, notice here she says, 6,000 years is nothing more than a political election going all the way back to heaven. And so as she expounded on that thought and how she put these sentence structures together, it really brought out these points very nicely about the great controversy in conjunction with politics and voting and the Sunday law issue. And so she tied these things in very nicely. And I think it's a good review, especially for the time period that we're living in.
Very much so. And I'm thinking of it as in terms of the big picture, the great controversy, the election between two political parties, or the election between love your neighbor or hate your neighbor.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's right.
One party, though they fail in compromising, one party would take the love your neighbor side.
Yeah.
And the other party takes hate.
Yes.
Nice review. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining. And like you said, you take it from the big picture and the external, and you bring it down at the personal level. And so it fits in very nicely in both ways as you expressed it. If anyone else wants to comment or bring out some other points, I know, what time are we, does this meeting go till?
We have 11:30. We have a
Okay,
hit live, so
Well, this is bringing up the Joe Rogan situation. My son, who still lives with me, he's 33 years old. He's right in that age bracket. You know, both my kids were raised Adventist to a certain point, and then they went their own ways. It's, do what they wanted. And in recent years, he he just fell hook, line, and sinker for the whole Joe Rogan experience. And he spent the last few years preaching to me and trying to get me to watch it and all that. and then, as you know, I learned about the Trinity, the four horsemen. Found out, he was informed about all that too, through his podcasts and things that he listened to. So we were both learning about all this in the same time period, but he was getting sucked into it. And, with all the comments everybody's made, I came to the conclusion that, he'd probably fit, pretty well into the, modern Adventist church with the way he thinks about everything. And he's a big Elon Musk fan. And he never, neither of my kids will ever like hold up a picture of Trump and, go vote and everything for him. But, and the other thought that came to my mind is, I guess he at least did not stray very far from where he started as an Adventist. I mean, that's a good conclusion I can come up with, based on just previous years' experience with him. And yeah, we have our little discussions and he tries to have them. And it's kind of like having a Bible study, and each side, two people having a Bible study and each side's using a different version of the Bible, and they're all trying to have the same conversation, and it never works. And he's in one stream, I'm in the other, and never should the two meet. But yeah, that's what everyone's comments made me think of, as far as my son is concerned.
painful to have your family members in that.
Yeah, my other son in Arizona, he's also fell into the whole conservative thing. He was probably listening to Rush Limbaugh down there in Arizona, for all I know, and he very anti-immigrant, both of them. Chris never calls himself a libertarian. Neither of them do. I wonder if they even know what they are, and understand all those implications. And my younger son actually did want a gun at some point. He was hanging out with some people who convinced him that was a cool thing to do. And he had some, he had a background which prevented him from getting one. And I was always so thankful that he was never able to get one, because he wanted to fit in with his friends who went to the gun range or shooting range and stuff like that. So that was, he couldn't fully become, a part of that whole militia thing because he couldn't get one of those things, I guess. But he listens to all of it night and day when he's not at work, and he comes up and shares all the latest stuff about Elon Musk and everything that I send him articles from our side. Just in the last couple of days, I was doing that. And I even forget what the subject was. It is. Oh, it was about Politico. Yeah, it was the thing about Politico, the Political Pro, that Elon Musk and them, they went around claiming that taxpayers were paying for, like government officials to be able to access Political Pro and to get liberal ideas out of it. Although I'm sure, it probably was more of a balanced thing, but I don't know. Okay, it's expensive, and it's expensive and everything, but I found article after article that showed that what he was being told was malarkey. And I duly sent them to him, but yeah, it never matters. Can't reason with an ideology.
If anybody else had any comments, otherwise we'll have Victor close in prayer unless Victor has anything left to add. A really nice study, thank you, and a nice review to go back. It helps with the time, exactly the time we're living in.
My pleasure. Thank you all for joining, and I look forward to our next presentation together. And if we could all kneel in prayer as we can. Dear God in heaven, we come before you and we just want to thank you, Lord, for helping us throughout this presentation to understand the significance of the time that we're living in. We thank you for bringing out these points clearly that we may be able to wrap our minds around it, that we can become more fully grounded in your word, that we may withstand the upcoming times that are right before us. We ask that you would continue to finish the work that you've begun in us, that we may fully understand this message and the times that we're living in, to be prepared for what's coming. We ask for your help. And as we bring this study to a close, we ask that you would send us your Holy Spirit to guide and direct our minds for the remaining Sabbath day, and be with our loved ones as we fellowship for the physical food. We ask that you would bless us as we come together and partake of the physical food, and be with everyone that couldn't make it to the study. Bless them also. And we ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.